Hello, kia ora, I'm Philip Duncan. It is Friday, the 7th of November. Thank you for joining me for our weekend weather outlook and the outlook right across next week as low pressure starts to return to New Zealand. At the moment, it's high pressure that is in charge of most of our weather. We do have some lower pressure to the north of the country. That's why we're seeing cloud and, of course, the thunderstorms all out there around Vanuatu and New Caledonia and just north of Norfolk Island. But we've got mostly dry skies around us at the moment. A bit of cloud around the north in the morning, that's mostly burnt away, and some higher cloud in the South Island ahead of the unsettled weather that's now moving through southeast Australia with the next burst of showers and a few thunderstorms for them as well. So on the air pressure map, you can see what is going on. High pressure is dominating the New Zealand area. Low pressure to the north of us, pretty weak. That's why it doesn't have the dark shading. It means it's only just a low pressure zone. But where you see the darker shading, that is a lot more low pressure. So obvious change here in Australia, away from the warm northerlies to a colder southerly. And I'm bringing that up because some of that colder weather will reach New Zealand next week as high pressure south of Australia moves towards us. But there's a gap between the highs, and so that's going to allow for a bit more low pressure and rain clouds to build, at least out on the Tasman Sea, as we go through the weekend. So let's make sense of the weekend here in New Zealand a little bit later on into Saturday afternoon, because we're seeing some afternoon showers forming at the top of New Zealand. They'll be a bit hit and miss, but they could be quite heavy, maybe even some thunderstorms in there too. Otherwise, it is a dry day, and remember, this is at the end of the day, so it may start off dry as well. Into the South Island, you've got some of that rain cloud moving in around Fiordland and South Westland and a bit around Stewart Island. Otherwise, it's dry with a fairly breezy sort of nor'wester coming through here and then working its way through the Southern Alps, varying wind directions. Light winds in the top of the country. Look at this. Here's the thunderstorm map for the afternoon. Now, it's right at the lower end of the scale there in the yellow shading, certainly when you compare it to the severe thunderstorms happening out over the Tasman Sea. But you've got a couple of showers that could be heavy around the Coromandel Peninsula, Northland, and maybe just brushing parts of the rest of Waikato and Auckland. Worth keeping an eye on. So why are we getting those showers? Well, if you zoom in closer, it's very easy to see it. And it's quite an interesting explanation. Northeasterly winds, you can see them in the white lines here moving along, coming in towards Auckland. And on the other side, southwesterly winds. So where those opposing winds meet, that's where it pushes upwards and you end up with a line of clouds. But it does depend on which sea breeze is strongest that will take over during the day. So you might get the showers bubbling up, and then one of these breezes, quite often it's the nor'easter around Auckland anyway, can blow that showery weather or those cloud buildups off and away from the city. So that's why sometimes you can have a forecast for a thunderstorm or a downpour and it's completely sunny, and that's because they are forming, but the sea breezes are pushing them one way or the other. So they kind of get pushed together, they bubble up, and then one of those sea breezes will guide them moving westwards or eastwards or northwards or southwards. So there are a few moving parts to it all, but that is the reason why we're getting those convergent showers. And again, here on Sunday, still got winds bubbling up and meeting together. So while it's not wet for all of these places, it does mean keep an eye on the rain radar this weekend, because you'll see these showers forming, and still plenty of large dry areas though, even at the top of the country. Elsewhere, very dry around New Zealand, other than the wet stuff around Fiordland. It's a bit windy in some areas around the South Island. It's nothing too major, but a little gusty maybe through some of the hills and ranges, and potentially also around Wellington, Cook Strait area as that nor'wester starts to build. And you can see the low pressure zones forming out here in the Tasman Sea. So let's go to next week. We kick off on Monday with warm and windy nor'westers in a number of areas. When I say windy, I don't necessarily mean stormy, but just a little bit unsettled. And you see a couple of showers bubbling up in the north, but the real rain over here on the west coast with some heavy falls. And those northwesterly winds, they might be a little brisk around parts of Canterbury, Marlborough, Cook Strait, Wellington, and even also up around some of the eastern sides of the North Island. Otherwise, winds aren't really a major problem for most places on Monday. By Tuesday, the showers move on through. Low rainfall totals for many places. This is not necessarily a giant rain event, but it could bring in cloud and a few showers. And then you see the polar boundary up here, returning to Victoria, returning to Tasmania, and getting very close to Stewart Island and Southland, but you're still on the warmer side of things. Got those nor'westers coming out of Australia over here, so that's going to help keep the temperatures up, but we do see a few showers lingering around the country on Tuesday of next week. So let's move through to Wednesday. So I've got low pressure. Believe it or not, low pressure is actually dominating the map here. I say believe it or not because the pale blue is at the lower end of the scale, so it's not necessarily a hugely wet day, and plenty of dry weather still around the east and also the south of New Zealand. But it's not hard to miss the storm south of Tasmania, and it's not hard to miss the polar boundary going all the way up, sort of the same latitude as Auckland. Now that is out at sea, so Auckland and North Islanders won't be cold because there's a northerly wind coming down for you. But it just shows you that that is very low air pressure, 974, and so that just means that low pressure may start to dominate New Zealand's weather map a little more as we go through to next week. And so we'll be monitoring what happens with that low south of Tassie next week. It's too far out to lock it in just yet. But what we're seeing here is high pressure out over the Tasman Sea and also over Adelaide. And that encourages a nor'wester into New Zealand. So that is usually a warm wind direction for most places. But of course that polar boundary comes in and over the lower part of the South Island on Thursday. And when we jump forward to Friday of next week, and again, not locked in just yet, but this is a spring-like blast of weather where we could be seeing severe gales around Canterbury and potentially Marlborough and around Cook Strait or Wellington. High pressure at the top of the country, keeping winds light. Northwesterlies coming through for many places, so it won't be cold for most, unless of course you're in that lower part of the South Island where low pressure is swamping the map here in the lower part of it, and that could drive in some snow flurries to the southwest corner and a temperature drop for people in Southland and Otago, and maybe even over around in Westland as well. So there's a few things going on next week due to the low pressure zone, but I've got to say there's still plenty of dry areas. It's not necessarily going to be the rain that some people want, if you live in the east, for example, and you want some rain. But if you live in the west and you're kind of sick of the rain, hopefully this won't be too much for you. But I've got to say, some parts of the west coast could be seeing some higher rainfall totals. So we may start to see the Met Service team putting out some severe weather warnings last week after what has been a very quiet start to this month following September and October. Before I leave, here is the rainfall map. So basically each day I've showed you this, you're seeing more in the way of rainfall showing up. Driest areas along the eastern side of New Zealand. Rainfall totals there between 0 and maybe only just getting up to about 10 millimetres. Other areas that you see around parts of Bay of Plenty and Northland and Auckland could be dependent on some of those heavy downpours that form. So it might show more rain than it really is, but you're seeing some areas there between 30 and potentially even 80 millimetres if you get one of those heavy downpours. But obviously most of the rain over on the west coast, especially the southern half of it, where you're talking over 100 millimetres or more of rain coming through. So we've got kind of classic spring weather where it's feeling like summer in many places at the moment, but spring is not summer. It's about winter slowly fading away and hints of summer slowly coming in. So to get a cold blast, not really very surprising. In fact, I'm kind of surprised we haven't had one yet, considering the weather we've had over September and October. That's all from me for this week. Thank you very much for joining me. Have yourselves a great weekend. I'm away on Monday, apologies for that, but back again on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.